Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's really good to be here in Tottenham. I think it's a great time to be here, and I think it's particularly good because obviously on top of George we have a really, really good panel of speakers, what I would refer to personally as solid sisters, women who work tirelessly for our communities, who've always put the interests of our communities at the forefront and who've spoken and tirelessly worked for them. So I did joke to Zita when I first saw her, I said there is something for somebody who chairs these kind of events that is so annoying. It's when you have fantastic speakers such as these, that their CVs are so impressive, you just simply can't say it all in one way, you just have to read it. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to read the whole list of their achievements, and it's pretty impressive. Our first speaker is an award-winning community, human rights and trade union activist and campaigner. She's also a poet, spoken word artist, writer, visual artist and curator. She's the co-founder and national co-chair of Black Activists Rising Against Cuts, BARAC UK, and is elected to the TUC Race Relations Committee, Public and Commercial Services Union National Executive. She's also PCS Group Vice President and an ACTA NEC member. Whew. She's a founding member of a number of anti-austerity and race and other equality campaigns organizations. She founded the Roots Culture Identity Art Exhibition to showcase the talents of young Black and migrant artists facing double discrimination in the labour market and institutional racism in the arts sector. Her art is used in illustrations, political campaigns, example the TUC, PSCs, and has been featured in a broad range of exhibitions. She was commissioned by the TUC to design the artwork for their Stephen Lawrence Centre fundraising appeal. She's described as a political poet and a griot of the struggle, and was a finalist and one of the 5 People's Choice Poets in the Monologues Extreme Spoken Word Contest. Her new book of poetry will be published by Hanson Publishing. She's the winner of the Positive Role Model for Race at the National Diversity Awards. She was listed by the Afro News as one of the top African and Caribbean Women of the Year. She is one of 14 women campaigners featured in the book Here We Stand, Women Changing the World, which this year won the Bread and Roses Award for Radical Publishing. She writes for various journals, which has included The Voice and The Morning Star. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Zita Holbourne.
Greetings, everyone. It's really good to be here this evening. As a note to myself now to cut down when somebody says they want an introductory, so there's less text. It's really good to be here. I want to start by talking a bit about my organisation, BARAC UK, and what we do and why we do it. And BARAC is a national campaign group, and so we have BARAC structures in various cities across the UK. And we set up BARAC in 2010 when we knew the cuts were going to have a clear disproportionate impact on Black communities. We used Black in the political sense to encompass all people from the African and Asian diasporas. And we campaign against the disproportionate impact of cuts and austerity on Black workers, Black communities and Black service users, but we also campaign against injustice and racism. And what we've found since 2010 is actually racism and injustice has deepened, as we go along. So we're constantly asked for support and help in individual cases, in collective cases, in community campaigns for people that have never had to run a campaign because of the impact on them. Austerity and cuts have had a clear disproportionate impact on Black communities. The cuts to the public sector employment and the knock-on impact on the voluntary sector, because funding cuts have taken place, meaning that a lot of Black organisations, anti-racist organisations or specialist organisations for Black and migrant communities, women and all sorts of other equality groups have had to close their doors in the last 5 years because their funding has been slashed down to nothing. They've gone from running an organisation with paid workers to only having volunteers, to having to run the organisation out of their front room and finally close their doors. And in my borough in Newham, we've heard that Newham Monitoring group, who's a long-standing anti-racist group that supports victims of police hatred and also race hatred, is coming to a point where they're going to have to close their doors. And it's a horrendous situation. It means that we're not actually monitoring or knowing exactly the extent of race cases that are taking place, race hatred cases that are taking place, or police victimisation, because those organisations, they're not just provided, monitored, but they also provided a lifeline to a lot of families and communities who come to them for help. And the cuts of the public sector have had a particular impact on black communities because it's the largest employment area of black people. And the voluntary sector is another large area. So it's not just users of the voluntary sector, but the employees in the voluntary sector. And the reason for that is because of the discrimination in the private sector, meaning they couldn't even get a foot in the door, on the ladder to build careers. After the Scarman report and the riots of Brixton, there were what was considered at the time, stronger equality policies put in place in the public sector, which meant it was a more attractive option for black workers in somewhere where they could apply for work. So the cuts that are happening to the public sector are having a particular impact on black communities, but particularly black women, because they've got a double whammy of gender and race discrimination. They're two of the groups in the in public sector employment who are the hardest hit. So if you're a black woman and you're also the breadwinner of the family, and your main income is coming in because your partner or other members of the family are in low-paid work, on zero-hour contracts and temporary contracts, you may be relying on that income that's coming in from the public sector worker. And to give you an example, in some London boroughs, where black women made up around 8% of the workforce, they made up 20 to 30 to 40% of the redundancy. So you can see the clear disproportionate impact. And there's a knock-on impact on young black people, because as they're slashing jobs, making people redundant, making us work longer to get our pensions, it means that young people are going to be virtually middle-aged before they can even get a job in the first place. The jobs are not there for them, apart from these very temporary jobs and zero-hour contracts, which you can see employers are really exploiting at the moment. And if you look at some of the like fast food and care industries and look at who's working in those jobs, it's black and migrant workers that are impacted on that. And what that means for young people is that they can't start to build a future or life. Even if they go to university, if they can handle the triple tuition fees, the slashing of EMA and everything else that's happened, they're coming back to live with families. They can't afford to get a mortgage in any shape or form. They can barely afford to rent from the private sector. There's no social housing being built. If you look at what happened with the Olympics legacy, before the Olympics, they knocked the tower blocks down because they said in the area, they weren't good environments to live in. They're now creating them again with penthouse suites for rich people, and they're private. They're not creating social housing. So young black people are really being hit left, right, and centre by the cuts. The slashing of EMA was a particular issue for black students because it was a lifeline for some poor and also obviously white students as well from poor and deprived communities, because it could mean the difference between them having their bus fare and their lunch money and being able to buy a book or two, for their studies or not. And the tripling of tuition fees means that they're creating an education system that's for the rich and elite and is not for everybody. And I believe education should be free and it should be for everybody. And a few days ago, I was here in Tottenham. We marked the 4th anniversary of the shooting of Mark Duggan, and his family are still fighting for justice. And Barrack supports a lot of family justice campaigns. And those families literally have to put their lives on hold to fight for justice. It means that somebody in that family, at least one person, has to literally give up whatever they were doing in their lives, and the family can't mourn, because until you've got answers and you've got closure, there's no way that you can mourn. So families are fighting, and then the cuts to legal aid mean that they can't even, pursue their case in the courts because they're not getting any funding for that. They can't work because they're having to campaign. So where's the money supposed to come from? And on top of that, the discrimination that we face in the workplace, which is deepening under austerity, it's amplified by austerity, a lot of people can't go to employment tribunal because they've introduced fees. So employers know this, and they take advantage of that. I think, yes, we can get away with discriminating, because how are they going to challenge it in the courts if they can't afford it? Employers will come with a team of lawyers, a team of barristers, and then you'll have an individual. If they're not in a unionised environment, where they're represented by the union, they're supposed to face all of that. It's very intimidating, let alone having to face the cost of the fees. And we shouldn't forget that, the riots that happened, or uprisings that happened here in Tottenham and other areas, they were as a result of yet another young black man's life being taken. There was a series of young black men killed at the hands of the state. And if you look at where those riots took place, looking at London in particular, they happened in the most deprived areas of London, in fact of the whole country. They were areas that were officially declared deprived, and they were the areas that had the highest take-up of EMA before it was slashed, and the highest take-up of free school meals, meaning that they were very poor areas. But what we saw after the riot, so clearly there are going to be areas that were disproportionately black and migrant communities living there. Because of the discrimination we face in society and in the labour market, it means we're more likely to live in the poorest area where there's more social housing because of that discrimination. And what we saw is an emergency debate in Parliament where young black people were demonised and called every name under the sun, and also black mothers were blamed and said they're not spending enough time with their children. It's their fault that their children did this. Absolutely disgraceful behaviour by politicians, not of course George, in Parliament. And that was across the political spectrum. It was across parties demonising young people in this way. And if you look at the prison sentences, or the sentences young people got, they were disproportionate to the crime. There was a place, for example, that was broken into already, and somebody went in there and took 2 scoops of ice cream. They got 2 years. So you imagine that if they took a 3rd scoop of ice cream, they would have to go to prison for 3 years. There was somebody who received a stolen item. A friend gave it to her as a gift, and she also received a sentence. They opened the courts, extended hours in the evening so they could rush through these cases. But the vast majority of them were overturned on appeal. That's where the young people had the support and the networks to have somebody come in, pro bono lawyer, to come and represent them. So it's a horrendous state of affairs, and we know that when austerity hits, if you look through history, racism increases. And we've seen an increase in the far right, the EDL, Britain First, and what that's done, together with politicians demonising migrant communities and black communities, scapegoating migrants and scaremongering so they can shift the blame of austerity away from themselves and onto migrant communities, is that's empowered ordinary people who hold racist views, who may have held it back before because they know there's laws, there's policies, they didn't feel safe before, confident to express it, to be so bold to express their racist views. The kind of language that my mother's generation coming from the Caribbean heard, go back to where you come from, go to the jungle, you monkey. You're hearing all of that kind of horrendous language happening again because people feel, well, we're backed up by a far right, we're backed up by UKIP, we're backed up by government policies. You've got the Immigration Act that was introduced and supported by all the political parties, with the exception of a very small handful of MPs, that actually seeks to create an apartheid state in the UK. And I saw a thing saying that I'm out of time. So I just wanted to conclude by saying, I think this meeting is really important. I'm not going to say anything about David Lammy. There was a lot said about him at the vigil we held for Mark Duggan. I know, because I've done lots of meetings in Tottenham before, that communities here are not very happy with him and how he's engaged with black and migrant and poor and deprived communities. But we need somebody that's running London that actually is engaged with our issues, acknowledges our issues, understands them, but more importantly, acts upon what we say is a concern to us. Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank you very much, Zita. I think, and I understand that CV, that very impressive CV. Just before we move on to our next speaker, out of this. Obviously, we know we're running a campaign, and campaigns are incredibly costly affairs. We're not a rich outfit, and everything is coming out of our pockets. So if I could actually ask for, at any point, any of you could make donations, however big or small, that would be very, very welcome. I'd appreciate that. Our next thing, I think, we often describe London as being a very diverse capital, which obviously it is, and it includes numerous communities. I think that not only should we be speaking about the issues of our communities, but it's also important now to understand the full history of the numerous communities that actually make up London. And so our next speaker has a very interesting CV. Once again, I'll have to read it out because it is very impressive. She's a juris consult specializing in the practice of law as resistance, reparations, legal specialist, and internationally acclaimed reparationist. She serves as co-vice chair of PARCO, Pan-African Reparations Coalition in Europe, co-founder of the Global African People's Parliament, as well as co-founder of the African Reparations Transnational Community of Practice. She is also a member of the 1st August Emancipation Day African People's Reparations March Organizing Committee. As a result of Esther's community-engaged reparations scholar activism, she's currently undertaking PhD action research in history at the University of Chichester on the history of the UK contingent and the International Social Movement for African Reparations, ISMA, based in the UK, which recovers the history of African and African diaspora reparations thought, advocacy, and other forms of activism in the UK from the 1700s to the present day. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Esther Stanford Xosei.
Greetings all, and thank you for inviting me to share a few words by way of a message in terms of your bid to be Mayor of London. Well, if you do become Mayor of London, you've already made a particular pledge that you will establish a museum for the slave trade, as you tweeted, as a down payment on reparations due. So I'll use that tweet to introduce what it is that I'm going to be sharing. Well, I'm a reparationist, and basically that means a reparations activist and campaigner. And many people have a mistaken view about what reparations is about. It essentially means all the efforts we make, all the measures we need to adopt and engage in to repair the injustices and legacies of enslavement and colonization and neo-colonization as they are impacting on the descendants of oppressed peoples today. And in particular, I'm speaking as a member of the African heritage community who is seeking national self-determination here in Britain, and also as a key member of the ISMA, which is the International Social Movement for African Reparations. On Saturday just past, throughout London, we had a march from Windrush Square in Brixton to the Houses of Parliament. And we had this march on the 1st of August, which is Emancipation Day. It's commemorated as Emancipation Day in the British colonised or former colonised Caribbean and other former colonies of Britain in Africa. Now this date commemorates the day, supposedly, when enslaved peoples in the Caribbean, in the Americas and in Africa were emancipated. And a piece of legislation was passed, the Abolition of Slavery Act, in the British Houses of Parliament. But some of you may have seen a series of programmes that was on BBC Two recently, Britain's Forgotten Slave Owners. Yep. And it talks about the abolition of enslavement, but rather than the enslaved, who had been deprived not only of our wealth and our labour, but our sovereignty, our humanity, and an attempt to deny us our dignity, it wasn't them that were compensated on so-called abolition, it was the enslavers. And that money went into building up Britain and, in fact, London as well. And so even the beneficiaries of some of that money are found in officers such as even the Prime Minister of this country, whose family received compensation for loss of human chattel in the enslaved. that really introduces the context to what the reparations movement means for all of us in London, and not just people of African descent. This is a movement that is really seeking to educate the wider population as well as to what reparations are about, why there is a need for reparations, and how we as African peoples are articulating the goals of the reparations movement. And so we recognise the United Nations framework on a right to a remedy and reparations, which recognises that reparations includes 5 main measures: restitution, rehabilitation, compensation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. What the march that we had on Saturday demonstrates, and in fact George was on the march, is that there is an independently organising, emerging, self-determined African heritage community that speaks for itself, has its own leaders, has its own structures, and it's these structures that we need you to recognise whilst you are bidding to become the mayor, and especially if you are successful. Why this is important is because for a long time we have been misrepresented. We've had black officials elected who have often been selected and chosen for us, and we're told that they are our leaders. What we have now, and this march demonstrates, is that people from the African heritage community are organising to assert our own voice around the very issues that many of us in this room will be concerned about. Austerity is a key issue, but for us, austerity is centuries old. It's not a new thing, and we've never ever recovered from that. The migrant crisis that we hear talking about, why is it many of our brothers and sisters from our motherland, our continent of Africa, are literally dying to come to Europe? It is because of the ongoing effects of enslavement and colonialism as they are impacting, and whereby our countries are becoming unviable and states unviable, and that's having a knock-on effect in terms of us here in Europe. So for those of us in London, we have to recognise London being a financial centre and capital, and also the fact that many of us of African heritage are part of this community that is global, that is now relinking again and asserting ourselves as a people. So some of the key demands that we would really have is that you first engage with our autonomous structures that are actually about building African agency and autonomy around the political direction that we see. One such emerging structure is the Global African People's Parliament. We do not proclaim to represent all African people, but a specific group of us who are saying that we actually need to assert ourselves as a community that is seeking a form of autonomy, cultural and political autonomy in Britain. We're not talking about, in terms of land, because we connect to our motherland, but certainly in terms of the institutions that we require in order to repair, heal and restore ourselves and tackle many of the maladies and injustices that we're facing today, such as Afrophobic racism and other forms of discrimination. Another key area that I think would be important that we would have your support on is pledging your cause and pledging support to the petition and the campaign that we used as a mobilising tool for the 1st of August march. And that is the Stop the Manganese, We Charge Genocide, Ecocide petition. What we were doing is we were saying to the British state, by way of the petition, that we are requesting of this current government to cease and desist from their acts in complicity in actually continuing the Manganese. Manganese is a term that we use, it's a key Swahili term, that means African Holocaust of chattel, colonial and neo-colonial forms of enslavement. So it's important for you to support that. The third one, and you could sign our petition, the third one is that we are very much interested in decolonisation in Britain. And in that regard, we are very much in support of the emerging nationalist struggles of the Scots and the Irish, the Welsh as well, where we can find common cause. We would also ask you to support National Mandamese Awareness Month, which is the month of August, and to give recognition to our 1st of August Emancipation Day March. So those are the key points that I think, as an African heritage community, we would be looking for your support. And we would want to have a dialogue, actually, about how best you, if you were to become mayor, could engage in actions that would be reparative. So we are not really keen on a museum of the slave trade because that's not really what we want to show. And so we recognise the initiative, however, and we invite you to continue that dialogue with us around what measures would be right for our community as well. And finally, we would ask you to support our campaign to set up an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice, which would be a way of also involving the wider British public in the dialogue on discourse and information around the legacies of enslavement and how it's impacting on African heritage communities and all communities in London. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. I think in a week, when the Prime Minister actually described migrants as a swarm coming in to invade Britain, I think it shows that your points are still very pertinent. There's a lot still to do when it comes to racial relations in this country. Our next speaker, obviously, I don't think needs any introduction. He's our next Mayor of London, basically. Ladies and gentlemen, George Galloway.
Thank you. Brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, thank you for that welcome. Thank you for coming on this very warm evening indoors. And thank you, Hafsa, as a very powerful and high-achieving woman yourself, for assembling this platform of powerful and high-achieving women. I feel like a minority in many respects on this platform this evening. I was explaining to my sisters on the platform that when I went to the Reparations march on Saturday, I felt like a minority, just like they feel like a minority most of the political events that they attend. It's good for me to be in this situation. I am self-evidently not a woman. Neither am I black, neither African nor Asian, though the Voice newspaper 3 years ago elected me, appointed me as the best black leader in Britain. An accolade of which I'm extremely proud. I was in fact in Indonesia about to be married when I got the Google alert about that. I was very proud of it, though it was probably as much to do with people's attitude to some of the so-called black leadership that I was up against in the poll, about whom, one of whom at least, more later. And I was described in Glasgow by a Pakistani comrade of mine thus: George is a white man, but he's got a black heart. I think I know what he meant. And the best I can claim as a Scottish Catholic of Irish extraction growing up in Scotland, I have faced, as that community has faced, to some extent, still faces, bigotry and discrimination in jobs and in many other respects. But my main reason for the politics I have that brings me into the closest possible contact with the political forces represented here on the platform is that as someone of Irish immigrant background, I really, really hate colonialism. I really, really hate empire. When I came home and told my Irish grandfather when I was at school that the teacher had said that Britain had an empire so vast that upon it the sun never set, he answered, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. And I never had cause to doubt that, neither then or since. So because I hate colonialism, because I hate supremacism, because I hate the idea that any person or group of persons can consider themselves superior to others and thus entitled to travel to their countries, kill them, and steal their things, that brings me into the closest possible connection with the people here gathered in Tottenham this evening, of all colours and backgrounds. And I think that in a political life now of more than 40 years, I can say without fear or favour that of all the candidates running for Mayor of London, I'm the one that has fought colonialism, racism, which of course is the foundation of colonialism, more than any other. Certainly more than the likely successful candidates. I mean no disrespect, at least not in this regard, to the others who are running, but my opponents are virtually certain to be Dame Tessa Jowell, standing for Labour, a Blairite who said that she would throw herself under a bus for Tony Blair. As Ken Livingstone pointed out to me, well, we've introduced a lot of new buses in London, and I have been since Christmas Eve 1973 a member of the Transport and General Workers Union, now Unite, and they've got a lot of members over there with brand new buses, so Tessa, there's still time. A supporter of war, a proselytizer for war, as the Labour candidate, imagine. And my likely Conservative opponent, the richest man ever to run for political office in the whole history of this country, and that's saying something, Zach Goldsmith. These are my two principal opponents, almost certainly, according to all the pundits, all the polls, and all the bookmakers. The latter point being the most important one. So in a race, a three-horse race, between me, Dame Tessa, and billionaire Zach, I think my position is a fairly clear one, and people have a fairly clear choice to make. Now, a lot of people criticized me, and Esther just did, from a different standpoint, for the statement I made on Saturday at Windrush Square via Twitter, that I felt there should be a museum of the slave trade here in London. A lot of white people said, why should people who didn't commit crimes pay money to people who didn't suffer them? Well, that's wrong on all counts. Of course, Esther, I'm ready for dialogue. And if there is no appetite for the museum I had in mind as a down payment of reparations due, of course I'm ready to look at that again. But here's how the idea came to me. Quite rightly, absolutely rightly, in many parts of the world, there are museums to the Holocaust to which all visitors are taken, to which due reverence is paid. No wonder. One of the greatest crimes in human history, in which millions of people perished in a genocidal, fascist extirpation policy. So why not a museum to the slave trade, which of course itself arguably is an even bigger crime, certainly one that lasted far longer and affected even more people. The genocide of the Holocaust of the 1930s and 40s is rightly elevated to a very high level of public consciousness. And the museums to the Holocaust are an important part of developing that consciousness. But there is no such museum in Britain to the Holocaust of slavery. And I feel that there should be. I feel that school children from all over Britain should be brought to London to visit a museum which tells them that it isn't true that you didn't benefit from slavery. The wealth of this country in Glasgow, in Bristol, and most importantly in London, was profoundly developed because of the slave trade. And you need to know it. You need to know, all of us, who are not the children of the slaves, need to know that we did benefit. Of course, my grandparents didn't benefit as much as David Cameron's. But it isn't true that we didn't benefit, because the national wealth of Britain is profoundly built on a trade which involved white people going to countries full of black people and literally stealing not just their things, but the people themselves. Chaining them in the holds of ships, sailing them across the seas, and putting them to work in the fields as human beasts of burden. And I saw the documentaries to which Esther has referred. And I've got to tell you, even for me, it came as a shock. The systemization, the ledgers. I have X number of cows. I have X number of sheep. I have X number of pigs. And I have X number of slaves. And the depreciation on the slaves is clearly marked. The arithmetic is there. So and so, the slave has been with me for X years. He has no children. He's getting on. He's got a bit of arthritis. Therefore, we'll mark him down in terms of asset to such and such a price. And the point is, as Esther said, when this abomination was abolished, the people who were compensated were not the slaves, but the slave owners. The slave owners were compensated for giving up an abominable, satanic practice of enslaving other human beings unashamedly, unembarrassedly. Well, I'm ashamed, even though I was not there and had no slaves. I'm ashamed. And I believe our country has to make reparation. Not to the slave owners. In fact, let's take it back from the slave owners and give it to the children of the slaves. Of course, how this reparation is arranged, to whom it is paid, what is the quantum, are all matters way beyond the powers of the Mayor of London. But one of the most important powers of the Mayor of London, especially if it's me, is that it is a pulpit. It is a pulpit to send messages to London, to Britain, and to the world. And I believe that that's a message that needs to be sent. Zita's powerful description of what Britain is today like is applicable, of course, as she herself said, to all communities. My friends are here from Bradford. I tell you, take a walk on the mean streets of Bradford where unemployment is 50%, where unemployment amongst young people is the absolute norm, where chicken and chips is $1.99 plus a can of Coke, where the only economy in many of the wards is not an economy we would like to highlight or illuminate. But it's the same in Clydebank, where all the people are white. It's the same on the Walworth Road. I don't know if you saw the Evening Standard yesterday about the 10 worst places to live in Britain. 9 of them are in London. One of the reasons, Esther, why I can't go with you down the path of Scottish nationalism, if you'll forgive me, is the idea that Scotland needs to be free of London. Like London's streets were paved with gold. Like we were all Zach goldsmiths. Actually, there are more poor people within a 5-mile radius of the Houses of Parliament than there are in the whole of Scotland, and in the whole of Wales, and in the whole of the north of Ireland, all put together. It is a lie that Londoners are somehow living at large, whilst people in other parts of this country are suffering as a result. We are all suffering. 9 out of 10 of the worst places to live in Britain are London boroughs, including this one. So, my message is, we need a London for all, not just those dripping in gold. There are some. Numerically, there are many. As a proportion, there are some. Londoners living well. But most Londoners are finding the cost of housing, of transport, of living here in London an increasingly crushing burden. So much so that the workers are leaving the city. I meet them all the time. Workers, East Enders, Cockneys, real Londoners whose families have been here for hundreds of years and who now come in here to visit, to walk around the London that they and their families lived in, because they can no longer afford to live here. And how could they? With the eye-watering rents and house prices that exist here, and for a variety of reasons, many of them illicit. Illicit. One of the reasons why house prices are as they are is because hundreds of thousands of houses have been built in London not to be lived in, but to be safety deposit boxes for criminal money, dirty money, of which we are the dirty money capital of the world. Even Cameron and Johnson have now acknowledged it. Though when I first alleged it, they said it wasn't true. But it is true. Houses are bought off the page by people in Kazakhstan, people in Singapore, in Malaysia, in China, in Russia, and many other places. Money that they have literally stolen from their own countries. They can't keep it in cash under the bed because the police might find it. The press might expose it. So what's the best thing to do? Buy in London. And that's why one of my most important pledges is this. If I'm the mayor, any house in London, unlived in for more than 1 year, without justifiable reason, will be compulsorily purchased by me as the mayor of London and will be let out to other people. Social housing. Did you see the diagram again in the Evening Standard this week of the building plan around Battersea Power Station? They were obliged to make some of the houses that they're building there, Malaysian company by the way, they were obliged to include some affordable housing, though what I've seen of the rents, I'm not sure to whom they would be affordable. But in any case, if you look at the plan, I mean, talk about being on the wrong side of the tracks. There's the power station. There's all the lovely facilities. There's all the lovely unaffordable houses. And like a kind of shanty town, attached at the very back are the tiny 7% proportion of so-called affordable houses. This under a mayor who promised that 25% of all housing developments in London would be affordable houses. It's 7% at the Battersea site. It's 0% in many other sites. Well, if I'm the mayor, 50%, one half of all new build in London will be affordable houses. And affordable housing will be defined not as 80% of average rents, but as 50% of average rents. And that's just two of the ways that I intend to deal with London's housing crisis. It's not just my friends who are being told they're out of time, it's even me. So I'm going to just deal with one other issue, and in Q&A perhaps we'll develop more. I want to deal with the question, which is of course important here in Tottenham, even more than it is elsewhere. I don't know if the police have anyone in the room. I see that they're outside, and I'm grateful for it. And what I'm about to say does not mean that I have any animus at all towards the Metropolitan Police. I've got to tell you that in 35 years in London, my experiences with the Metropolitan Police have been, with one exception, absolutely first class. The one exception being when a senior commander in the anti-terrorism squad slept in my bed whilst I was out of the country without my knowledge or permission. But that's another matter. He was in the bed with someone, but not someone in my family. But his DNA is there. But my experience of the Metropolitan Police has been a good one. But then I'm white with blue eyes. And for most of the 35 years, I've been relatively well known. And for almost 30 years of it, I've been a member of Parliament. So if my experience with them is not good, what would the rest of it, what would everyone else's experience be? But my point is, I come at this not with any sense of animus, because we need the police. If we had a problem, the reason they're here tonight is because some people threatened us with a problem. If we have a problem, we need them. If our houses, God forbid, are broken into tonight, we'll need to call them. There's nobody else to call. I have no hatred at all for the Metropolitan Police. If I'm the mayor, I'll be in charge of the Metropolitan Police. They will find me, in terms of their resources, in terms of their ability to do their job, a friend. But I cannot tolerate racism. I'm for the police, but I'm against racism. And the racism that still exists in the Metropolitan Police, and indeed we discover from a survey this week, even the Dorset Police. In Dorset, there are 2,200 black people. But those 2,200 black people are 17 times more likely to have been stopped and searched in the last 12 months in Dorset. So if you're black in Dorset, you might as well step out on the street with your hands up. You might as well say, before I go any further, do you want to stop and search me? In Dorset. Now, we cannot have this. We cannot have discriminatory policing. We have to police everybody the same. Whatever color their skin is, whatever color their collar is. Because you see, the biggest criminals in London are white people with white collars. They're called bankers. They're called bankers. If you want a charge sheet, well, this one is not just as long as your arm, it's as long as the square mile itself. One guy went to prison this week, but he was just a trader. We're asked to believe that this one guy decided himself to fix the LIBOR rate illegally for his own profit and for the profit of the banks, but nobody knew. Those above him didn't know. They didn't realize that their profits were booming because their staff were rigging a market. Well, I don't believe that. And we can't have a situation where the banks are too big to fail and the bankers are too big to jail. I want to see the heads of these banks doing the perp walk. I want to see them in handcuffs. Because until they do the perp walk, until they're in the handcuffs, why would they stop? One person since 2008 has gone to jail, and that was this week. Now, as I put it, of the City of London Police, if you pick somebody's pocket in Liverpool Street Station, you'll be picked up pretty damn quick and you'll be behind bars. But if you steal millions, tens of millions, from the public, because if the banks are too big to fail, all the theft is from the public. Because the public have to bail out the bank that's been destroyed by the thieves. Then your chances of going to jail were, until this week, 0. And are now precisely 1. So we can't have policing different in the Walworth Road, on Seven Sisters Road, and in Threadneedle Street. We can't have response times in Hampstead, through which I've just driven. They're very beautiful. It is too. We can't have different response times there than we have in Tottenham, because that's discrimination. And if it happens, I'll want to know from the Commissioner, who may or may not still be Mr. Hogan, how, whoever he or she is, they'll have to answer to me about racist policing, about incompetent policing, about discriminatory policing. As I said, they can count on me when it comes to numbers, when it comes to resources. Although I'm going to rent out those water cannons that Boris Johnson bought, and I'm going to allow those that rent them out to hunt Boris Johnson up and down the streets of Mayfair and see if they can find him and try and wash his mouth out. I should stop now because the person who's really in charge is indicating ferociously that I've spoken for too long. I'm really grateful that you all came. I'm grateful to my friends for sharing this platform, and I'm ready to answer any question that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George. Before I hand over to the floor, these are a couple of questions that were sent to us, so from viewers, no doubt. So this is a good one. In light of recent events, there was a tube strike due to Boris Johnson plan for 24-hour tubes. How do you plan to deal with this?
Well, as I said, I've been a trade unionist since Christmas Eve of 1973. That's a long time ago. I am a part of the trade union movement. I know the trade unions in a way that Boris Johnson, nor Zach Goldsmith, nor frankly Dame Tessa Jowell ever could. And I'll be a better person in negotiating with them than any of the others. That's not to say everything the trade unions ask for they'll get. How could that be? Because the mayor has to represent everybody, not just the producers, but the consumers. But the crime of Johnson, whose mayorship is petering out in a rather pathetic disarray, is that he made the announcement about the nighttime tube without any consultation with the people who have to work it. Now, any fool knoweth that that's asking for trouble. It's asking for trouble with any workforce, let alone one that, thank God, is one of the last trade unionized, organized workforces in the country. Which leads me to believe that he did it deliberately, that he wanted to pick a fight with the trade unions, because by now he thought he'd be the leader of the opposition. The one person even more unhappy than Ed Miliband about the result of the general election in May was Boris Johnson, who did all of this in order to be back in Parliament and in pole position to be the leader of the Conservative Party. I'm glad to say all that's in disarray now. So I'm in favour of the night tube. So is the RMT. So is ASLE. I wonder if they know even what these initials mean. But there has to be negotiated. Everything has to be negotiated. And for many changes in London. For example, no trucks or heavy vehicles will be allowed in London during the night, during the day if I'm the mayor. They'll all have to work and deliver during the night. But that has to be negotiated. Because our air pollution, our road traffic accidents, our congestion, and the number of cyclists who are being killed and maimed is such that we can't have trucks and heavy vehicles in London during the day. That's my policy, but I recognize that I will have to negotiate it with those who have a stake in that, as indeed the companies who employ the workers who are currently driving during the day will have to negotiate with their staff about it. Everything has to be consulted and negotiated. And I've been consulting and negotiating all of my life.
And now, if anyone in the audience has a question, please be my guest. Please stand up and give it a bit of voice.
Hi, my name is Sharif. I came from Holbourne. I wanted to ask that when you become mayor, how will you raise the money for the affordable homes? And as an independent mayor, how will you deal with a conservative prime minister and conservative government?
Thank you. Well, I'll fight the Conservative Prime Minister. I'll fight him as much as I can with the powers of the mayoralty, and I'll fight him with the power that God gave me in my voice. And I think of all the candidates that will be running for this office, I have the most powerful voice. I have the clearest intentions, and I have the clearest alternative program. And if, and as we're in a church, Catholic church at that, I pray that Jeremy Corbyn is elected as the Labour leader. I'll work with him. He on one side of the river and me on the other side of the river. We will try to organise people into mass opposition to the crimes of the Conservative Prime Minister and Chancellor, one of which was committed again this very week. £1 billion of public money was stolen from us this week by George Osborne for the benefit of the hedge funds and the Tory donors in the city, selling our shares in the Royal Bank of Scotland at a loss. If the mayor of this borough did that, he'd be in jail. If any one of us did that with our employers' resources, we'd be in jail. Osborne did it brazenly. It's a crime. It's theft of 1 billion, 1.1 billion. Of course, he did take advice from Rothschilds. They were his advisors. Well, Zach is married to one of the Rothschilds. He could have given him the advice for nothing, but why get it for nothing if you can pay big public money for it? Rothschild was paid to advise the Chancellor, now's a good time to lose 1.1 billion pounds of public money. Of course, there were other advisors, not just Rothschilds. Goldman Sachs also got paid for giving the same advice. These people are criminals. And if I'm the mayor, I'll use every breath that God gives me to persuade Londoners in their millions of that fact. And if Jeremy is the leader of the opposition, I think we'll have quite a concert party, don't you?
The question I would like to put directly to George is this. Are you the mayoral candidate that is pledging support to the African Heritage Community cause of reparations? Do we take it that that is your position? And the second point related to some of the things you said is also, do we take it that your position is going to be one of dialogue with our communities on each and every issue? This is critical because in relation to the issue about the museum, it's not that we are saying that a museum may not be useful to us. But the point about it is that our communities don't want a situation where people outside are deciding for us what is good for us. And therefore, it has to be a matter of consultation. And this, for me, also relates to the issue of Scottish independence, that the right of every people to self-determination has to be respected. And it's not about how many poor people are in London and how many poor people are in Scotland. It's about the fact that every people must have the right to self-determination, including the right to be independent. And if that were to happen from the perspective of our African heritage communities, then the power of the British Empire that we still feel will begin to be divided. And that is a critical point for us. So in all of this, it has to be recognizing that every people have their positions, and we should work through consensus by dialogue. Is that your position?
Well, the Scottish people already have the right of self-determination. Unlike the people of the north of Ireland, unlike the people of Palestine, unlike many other colonized people, the Scottish people have the right of self-determination. Indeed, just last September, they exercised it. The right of self-determination is the right to decide whether to be an independent state or whether to continue with other nations in a multinational state. And that's what the Scottish people decided. That's self-determination. Now, I happen to agree with the decision that they made last September. But they made it. Clearly, whether I agree with it or not, and with respect, brother, whether you agree with it or not. I can't speak for your people, you can't speak for mine. Mine already spoke. They already voted. And they voted no. And I think they were right to do so precisely because there are more poor people in London than there are in Scotland. That it is a lie that the reason for poverty in Scotland is because of the people of England. That's just a lie. And I'm therefore glad that they rejected that lie. You're not in first place to me on hatred of the British Empire. I hope I made that clear in quite a long opening address. But I don't believe that the role of empire will be weakened by 5 million Scots leaving the British state. In fact, far from being a colony, Scotland was a colonizer. As anyone from the empire knows, the kilt, the bagpipes, and the Scottish flag swirled over every killing field that the British Empire was ever involved in. In fact, Scotland founded colonies before England did. Ulster was colonized by Scotland 100 years before the British state even came into existence. So I hate colonies, I hate empire, whether Scotland, England, America, Britain, or any other power is the colonizing power. And so, in answer to your first question, as I said in my opening address, I want dialogue, and I'm ready to negotiate this or any other matter with the communities affected. But I must tell you that the principal reason for the Museum on Slavery is not for you, it's for people like me. It's people who look like me. Black people don't need to know about slavery. They were the victims of it. It's white people that need to make school trips to a museum on slavery because, listen, I'm a radio host. For 7 years, I had a talk show on Fridays and Saturday nights on Talk Sport. Some of you will have listened. And between you and me, next week, I'm about to start as a radio talk show host again. I've got to tell you, 9 out of 10 white collars on this subject, and I've been raising it on the radio for a decade, 9 out of 10 white collars are against my policy of reparation, which is a support to your policy of reparation. Esther was on my television show. She educated me about the need for reparation and how it could take shape. And that's my policy, whether 100% of all white people are against it or not. As Martin Luther King said, some people support things because they're popular. Some people support things because they're profitable. I support things because they're right, whether they're popular or profitable. And I support reparations because it's right. And I'll defend it with my voice, with my pen, with my heart, anyway. And I will be doing it again from next week on the radio. But don't imagine that it's a popular policy. It's a very unpopular policy I'm pledging myself to here. But one of the gifts that God gave me is the ability consistently to make things that were unpopular, popular. When I started in 1975 popularizing the Palestinian cause in Britain, You could have fitted all the supporters of the PLO in this room just before we got arrested. But now we're millions. And I played a part in that. I'm quite good at persuading people. And whether I persuade them or not, there's the flag. There's one of the millions. Whether I persuade them or not, it won't stop me from saying what I believe to be right. And I hope to do it. As the mayor, I'll tell you, frankly, if I'm the mayor, both of these women will be in important positions in London, because we need to hear from them. And they need to educate us, as both of them in their own way, for me, already have.
George, I'm also Catholic of Irish descent, and I'm from Tottenham, born and bred. And I'm just completely overwhelmed and so proud of the work you do for the Palestinian cause. Do you think becoming mayor can aid the cause, or will it give you any more leeway to do anything about the plight of the Palestinians?
Well, thank you, first of all, for what you said. I'm not running for mayor for the Palestinians. I've spent 40 years in that cause. I've done my bit, and I'll continue to do my bit. But the Mayor of London is not the Foreign Secretary. He's not the Pope. He's not the Prime Minister. He's the Mayor of London. And there are very clear limits to their powers, to the powers of the mayoralty. So I will not be trying to make London an Israel-free zone. I will not try to make London an Israel-free zone. But I will use the pulpit that I have as the mayor to speak up for justice in London, in Britain, and everywhere in the world. And of course, the Palestinian cause is a part of that. But everyone will be welcome in London, except criminals. And the communities, all the communities in London, have an equal and valid right to be respected and to be represented by the mayor. And that's what I'll try to do.
Cool.
Thank you.
Throughout the 80s, many will remember that there was always a protest outside South Africa House, and sometimes there were 100 people, sometimes there were 5 people. But what it indicated basically is that London and its all diversity actually made apartheid South Africa feel unwelcome. And I think that even if George will not make London an Israel-free zone, I think Londoners who are rejecting Israeli policies will probably make that felt. Anyone else, please? For you. Oh, sorry.
In terms of stop and search, it seems like a lot of police don't seem to understand the difference between what is legal and lawful in terms of stop and search. So maybe you can get to a point where they can start to be educated in terms of what that is, because they seem to be taking a lot of liberties through their ignorance. And also that point of police by consent. Maybe someone can define that term and what it really means.
Yeah, well, the reality is that almost everybody who is stopped and searched finds it an extremely negative experience. And that alienates them from the police, which is precisely the opposite of what a police force in a democratic country needs to have happening. In a democratic country, the people need to feel that the police are for them, not an occupation force on them. And every time there is a stop and search, there is a further deepening alienation. And when it's abundantly obvious that discrimination is at play, that someone like me is 17 times less likely to be stopped and searched than someone who looks like the brother there, or other brothers and sisters here, that's a recipe for trouble. And I can't believe that the Commissioner doesn't know that. But if he doesn't know it, he'll know it pretty quickly if I'm the Mayor.
We have more slavery in the world now than we've ever had on this planet. And one of the major culprits for that is the Qatari royal family. They own Paris, they own Chelsea Barracks, they own the old American embassy. I think they own part of Battersea Power Station for Malaysia. You know, they are lauded, and yet they are the biggest culprits of slavery probably on this planet.
On the issue of the Qatar royal family, they own far more even, sir, than you, Adam Bray. They own the Shard, they own the Camden Lock Market, imagine, though I don't imagine many of them would ever go there. They own 18% of London, and they too are welcome. Their investment in London is welcome. I can't tell anybody that they can't come to London and buy assets, but I can insist that those assets are productive and that they are for the purposes as stated. So that, for example, if the houses that are to be built on the Chelsea Barracks are being bought not to be lived in, but merely to appreciate, well, the same will go for them. I see someone's filming this. Maybe they're from the Qatar royal family. Let me choose my words carefully. If you're buying multi-million-pound assets in London and you're not living in them, you're merely buying them so that the asset will appreciate, I will compulsorily purchase you. Whether it's number 1 Knightsbridge, or whether it's the Chelsea Barracks, or whether it's the Battersea Power Station, I'll use our powers to compulsorily purchase your property if you do not live in it. The Qatar royal family is responsible for slave labour in the construction of World Cup facilities. The only mitigating thing I'd say is that they are employing less slave labour than some of their neighbours. The Qatar royal family is a dictatorship. The only thing I can say in mitigation is it's less of a dictatorship than some of its neighbours. I'm against all kings, all emirs, all dictators, in all countries, at all times, everywhere. But I can't stop them coming to London. I don't have the power to do it, and if I did have the power to do it, we'd be in a very different country, in a very different world. So my message to the Qataris is the same as it is to everybody else. You're welcome in London. Your business is welcome in London. Your investment is welcome in London. But it cannot be used against the interests of Londoners. And that I will promise to ensure.
The lady there and then the gentleman up there. Okay.
George, is Mayor of London, would you put a stop to the demolition of the social housing that's happening, has been tried with in Tottenham? Because if I'm right, the Mayor has the final say.
Yeah.
And Tottenham getting gentrified.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm very happy to hear a fellow Scottish accent, which I could probably place down to the exact street on the south side of Glasgow.
No.
I'm joking. I'm joking. I've been away too long to, but I once could. The last speech I gave in Parliament, as a Member of Parliament, I was a member for almost 28 years, elected 6 times. The last speech I gave, in fact I gave 12 speeches in the same night, 12 interventions. was on the subject of the disposal of Transport for London property at Earl's Court, where social housing was being destroyed in order to allow TfL to sell valuable public land for private development. And it's already now underway. And I'm only too aware that in Tottenham and in many other parts of London, this valuable public land, which could and should be used for social housing, never mind affordable rents. I'm in favour of affordable rents, but I'm more in favour of social housing, council housing. Yeah. What's wrong with council housing? The London boroughs should be freed to borrow money to build houses for the people that desperately need them here. That'll put building workers to work, will provide roofs for people, families who need them, and keep communities that are here, and not driven ever further to the edge. So, I don't have power to force the government to relax the rules on the boroughs about their ability to borrow and build. But I will endlessly proselytize. I'll make the government ministers' lives a misery until that social housing is being built in London and working class people are being moved back into the city instead of out of the city. You know that 30,000 families in London have been shipped out as far as Stoke by London boroughs who can't afford to house them, and have given them money to go and live in Stoke. I mean, have you seen Stoke? The ethnic cleansing or social cleansing of London is underway, and we have to reverse it. Now, I lived in a slum when I was born, with an outside toilet. The seat was always warm. We shared it with 5 other families. I lived in an attic, in fact. And when I was 5 years old, the utterly transformative act took place that our slum was knocked down and a brand spanking new council house with an inside toilet and a bath and a garden was provided to us. It was utterly life-changing, not just for us, but for a whole generation of hundreds of thousands of people who were involved in the post-war slum clearance and council house building in Britain. What's wrong with that? Why would we not want to do that? Even under the Tories, under Harold Macmillan, Britain was building 300,000 council houses a year. Do you know how many council houses were built in London last year? In the whole of London, a city of 8 million people, 70. 70. That's enough for us here in this room, in the whole of London, in the whole of last year. That's the real scandal. I was almost imprisoned in Dundee in 1980 for refusing to allow our council in Dundee to sell council houses. They sent 3 High Court judges to hold an inquiry on pain of imprisonment of me as the Labour organiser in the city, forbidding our councillors to sell our houses. And I said then, what 35 years later, everyone surely must accept that these council houses are public property. You cannot cut the price in half and sell it to an individual who happens to be the tenant at this particular time, particularly when you're not going to allow the council even to use the money to build new council houses to replace the stock that you're selling off. The Tories under Thatcher committed many crimes, but one of the most significant was the sale of council houses. It has led to the mass problem of overcrowding, of homelessness, of private rack renting, many of whom are MPs, by the way, 25% of Tory MPs are private landlords. No wonder there's so much in favour of the private rented sector. Yes. We are spending 20 times the money on the public subsidy of private landlords through housing benefit than we are on building social houses. 20 times in London. 20 times more we give to private landlords than we do on building social housing. That's what needs to change. Now the mayor can't change that, all of that, even any of that, on his own or her own. But as I hope you're already getting the message, I'm quite a good campaigner. I'm quite a strong voice. And me and Jeremy Corbyn, my goodness, we'll have them shaking in their shoes.
And then the last question for the gentleman in the back there.
Thank you. Housing is going to be probably your biggest issue.
Yeah.
And it's continually arising. And it's what the guy was saying there about cleansing, what you're saying about cleansing. London is like, it's one private sector rent house. There's nothing else anymore. Social housing is the solution to bringing back some kind of equality here. We need council houses or some kind of low rent social housing. We also need some kind of project that you have to tell us exactly how you're going to build those houses. What exactly are you going to do to create some kind of council housing, low-cost rental project? I mean, how are you going to achieve it?
Okay.
And this has got to be, for me, if you have any chance of making a name for yourself against the odds, which I've got every believing confidence in you. But the housing issue, and if you don't come up with a rock solid housing proposal, which you say, I'm going to be mayor, and this is what I'm going to do, and this is going to be my primary. No, well, it's got to be some kind. There has to be some kind of. It's got to be in stone, basically.
Well,
how are you going to do it?
Yeah, it won't be in a headstone like Ed Miliband's headstone.
Something like that.
But I appreciate what you said and the spirit in which you offer it. Unfortunately, the mayor can't build houses. That power lies with the boroughs. Incidentally, I think there's far too many boroughs, but that's another matter. I'm not sure we need 32 boroughs. I'm not sure we need 32 chief executives. I'm not sure we need 32 council headquarters, but that's another matter. The mayor has the power to compulsory purchase. The mayor has the power to grant planning permission. All I can do is say to developers, and I'm saying it now on camera, don't bother coming to me for planning permission unless 50% of your homes are affordable homes. You will not be given permission. Now they say, the right wing says, Zach Goldsmith says, well, the developers will simply not build. I don't believe that. But if that's the case, that will merely make stronger my case, your case, that actually social housing is what's necessary, not private development, even with 50% affordable homes within them. All I can do is find allies in the boroughs, on the opposition benches, in the media, and amongst the public to build an unstoppable case for social housing, which is underway. Even Jeremy Corbyn's right-wing opposition are now saying we need social housing. Boroughs need to be given the power to borrow to build social housing. Well, they'll need to say it a bit louder, and they'll need to do something about it, but that's what is necessary. That's the only solution, because what the friend from Tyrone pointed out, better than I could have expressed it, I'm not going to repeat it. It is what I said earlier, but he said it more succinctly. That working class people, black and white, young and old, are being driven out of London by the scale of house prices and rents. And that equates to social and ethnic cleansing. And the gentrification, even of Tottenham, imagine. Sorry, no disrespect. Yeah. The gentrification of one part of London after another is actually even robbing those parts of the reason why people moved into them in the first place. My friend there with the sling, Carol from Bow, used to be a regular caller on TalkSport when I had a show there, was a comrade of mine when I was the MP there. She's one of the main campaigners in London for social housing, against the transfer of social housing to these so-called arm's length management organisations, the Almos, and the privatisation of public housing stock. She's from Tower Hamlets. She'll tell you the reason people wanted to live in and around Brick Lane, in and around Bethnal Green, was because of the character of Brick Lane and Bethnal Green. But the more you gentrify it, the less of that character it has, until eventually the only people living there are the gentry, living amongst each other and living in what is effectively a living museum. And that's happened already in Brick Lane, and it's happening in many other parts of London. So we have to stop it. The mayor has planning powers, strategic planning powers, and I'll use them. And I'll use the pulpit that the mayoralty would give me to try to build the coalition that is necessary to ensure either that this government or the next one, which I hope will be led by Jeremy Corbyn, will unleash a wave of social house building at least as good as the Tory Prime Minister Harold Macmillan used to. I mean, how revolutionary can you get? My aspiration is to build as many council houses as Harold Macmillan used to build. How's that for shrunken ambition? It's now the most revolutionary demand that you can make. The first of the three questions was, I've now forgotten. Youth. So the youth services are being decimated in London, and that's before the current round of cuts make their way through the local authority system. That's just on the cuts already being implemented. I don't know the situation here in this borough, but I know it in other parts of the country, and I know it in East London very well. I'm going to argue that we need to restore the ENA that Zita talked about. The mayor doesn't have power to restore it, but the mayor plus the boroughs plus the universities. Universities have big funds for ensuring plurality, ethnic and class plurality. Well, the best way to ensure ethnic and class plurality coming through into the universities is to make sure that kids are able to stay on at school in order to go to the university, and education maintenance allowance is a key part of that. On that, I think I'll have some success. I'll encourage the boroughs not to cut. I mean, it's so self-evidently counterproductive to, in a recession, in periods of economic retrenchment and austerity, to be turning more and more young people out on the street where the devil can find work for their idle hands. It's not even simple policing and economic sense. A stitch in time saves 9. The absence of that stitch is going to be far more expensive than the stitch itself would have been. Well, you don't need to be Einstein to work out that if young people have no proper jobs, no proper services, no youth facilities, nowhere to go, then trouble can be the only logical result. So, youth services is the last thing you should be cutting. There is one thing I can do that might be able to provide substantial resources. It's a bit late in the evening to go into it in detail now, but let me sketch it quickly. I'm going to put the £17 billion a year mayor's budget onto something called the blockchain, which is the mayor's blockchain. You can go onto the web and check it out. What that means essentially is that that 17 billion will be available in real time to anyone who wishes to observe it. That is to say, if I take Zita and Esther, which I want, out 3 times a week for a Chinese takeaway, to thank them for the advice that they're giving me, you'll know about it just as soon as my card has cleared in the Chinese takeaway. And you'll be able to say in real time, that's the 3rd time this week you've taken that for a Chinese takeaway. Is it not about time you tried? Not about time you took them somewhere better. But seriously, that system will be transparent to you on much more important things than Chinese takeaway bills. You'll be able to see who I'm spending millions of pounds with. And you'll be able to say, why are you spending that millions of pounds with them? You get far better value for money with them. I'm suspicious of that transaction. Why did you make it? We'll have an entire unit responding to the public daily, hourly. In fact, I think it's refreshed every 3 minutes. 3 minutes. You'll be able to transparently observe exactly how that 17 billion budget is spent. And it's our estimation, based on excellent young people in the financial technology sector, which we have around in Shoreditch and elsewhere in London, who are developing this for me. We think we'll save almost £1 billion a year from that blockchain technology through public scrutiny and suggestion. At least 900 million we think we will save. And we'll put that 900 million to use principally for services towards young people. That's it.